Good afternoon. First of all, let me, just out of my own sense of respect, is to thank the media for their patience. It is a little challenging getting around town from a number of different responsibilities, and I do thank you so very much. This is very close to my heart, and so I thank you for your patience. I've just returned from the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. I've been a delegate for a number of years. I'm also a member of the Interparliamentary Exchange in Europe, and so I've dealt with the Baltic states, the Balkans, and Europe for a very long time. I'm on the Homeland Security Committee. We left last Sunday with all good intentions, hoping to meet with Lithuanians in particular, who are a NATO ally country. It is extremely small, about 4 million, if my recollection is correct, and to also engage with messages to the Russians through the Lithuanians and to Ukraine, and to ultimately meet with leaders from Europe that included, at that time, the Russians, Ukrainians, French, Great Britain, and basically all the countries in Europe that are members of the OSCE. Just for our information, how tight the area is, Russia borders Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, Lithuania, and then, of course, Ukraine. And Lithuania and Belarus are all together. I know this map, are all together and potentially able to be impacted by anything in one country. It can impact another country. And so our interest was the delegation from the United States Congress, bipartisan delegation, was to actually send messages to work with the Lithuanians, and really between Sunday and Monday and Tuesday, we were hoping that we would have, between the work of the president and heads of state, that we'd find some way for Russia to stand down. The last Wednesday was Russia's national holiday. It was Defender Day, and it was that late night, early morning that Putin decided to ignore all of the entrees that had been given to them and decided to attack with a senseless, immoral, and purposeless war against the innocent people of Ukraine. I am passionate about this useless use and abuse of power because of the lives that will be lost. When we were asked, or it was asked for an explanation from Russia as to what exactly could be the cause of this war. We know the Allies in World War II were fighting against the heinous acts of Nazi Germany and Hitler and the murderous rampage that he waged across Europe and the Holocaust that he perpetrated against an innocent people, the Jewish people. Ukraine has been a neighbor. They are of Russian heritage and connection, but they've been a peaceful neighbor. They have moved on technology. They are a democratic republic or a democratic country. They have wanted to live with their neighbors. Their neighbors find them good neighbors, and they want to just have an ability to thrive for their young people. I was in Ukraine a couple of years ago around the time that Russia took Crimea. I remember the pain that all of us felt when an innocent commercial airline was shot down by Russian terrorists. And that is what we have today, Russian terrorists. Because Russia continued to make the argument that they were, first, they start saying that there was genocide. There was no genocide of Russian language-speaking persons. There are Russian language-speaking persons in Ukraine. They love Ukraine. They love their heritage. And then Russia was suggesting that they had to protect people, and they had to protect territories where Russians were. No one was attacking the territory. They were not, as we could understand, they were not representing the government. If there was conflict, it was not government directed. Though obviously Russia took land that Ukraine believes is theirs. Donbass is an area where the Russians claimed they had to go in to protect or to claim. They gave them independence, if you could imagine. All the while we have been talking and trying to develop a pathway for peace. And I believe that peace should still be a possibility. I do not rush to war, I rush toward peace. But as we were in these meetings, the Ukrainians were giving us reports, and so the first hits that we got information on that had not gotten to the media in the early days that struck my heart was the hitting of a hospital, the killing of 5 children. The numbers were going up. Women and children were dying. And Russia had indicated that this was operational and they were not going to target civilian facilities. As early as Wednesday when we were in meetings, and Thursday, the numbers of deaths were coming in and civilians were losing their life. Now, apartment buildings have been hit, and it goes on. Commandos are in Kyiv, and it has been affirmed by the Russians that they are intending or attempting to do harm to the leader of Ukraine and others surrounding him and his family. And so just as I would be concerned with the deaths that went on in Syria, where Russia was supporting this despotic president in Syria, that is way away from the United States. My responsibilities on Homeland Security and on these committees internationally dealing with trying not to have another World War III, Ukraine has become very personal. And I believe that it is important for the United States leadership to continue. I want to applaud President Biden, Vice President Harris, the meeting in Munich. They want to do more. They want to continue to keep the pressure on Russia. And they have issued certain defensive sanctions in dealing with banking. But I think now, as Ukrainians are fleeing the country to Poland and to other places that would take them, but the borders, I want you to understand, is they are as frightened as the people of Ukraine. Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania are frightened that this is going to come to their doorstep. And so in trying not to have World War III, we have to make sure that we are protecting a large landscape of people. And Russia has to feel the pain. Now let me be very clear. I've used Russia a lot. There is no doubt that this is Putin's war. Russian people did not vote on this war. This is Putin's war. This is Putin's reordering of history. This is a very unfortunate, sick analysis of history. He wants to restore the USSR. For many people alive today that are young people, they don't even understand what that was. It's a collection of nations that by their own will, they were under, by their own will, not their own will, they were under the USSR, United Soviet Union, Union Soviet States. He believes that the world order was disrupted when those nations became free, became independent nations. And he gave a long, rambling speech, which I hope not to add to, of wanting to recapture that again, and Ukraine is the first test of that. My fear is Ukraine falls, the region falls. Ukraine falls, the region falls. So I think it is very important to have these very fine supporters here today to let the Ukraine American community in Texas, in Houston, know that we are praying for them to let the people of Ukraine know that we're praying for them, but we also want to act on their behalf. And so let me just for a moment capture the essence of our position here today, and I'll be delighted to have a number of very fine representatives who are engaged with Ukraine, their countries are engaged with Ukraine, and let me allow them as well. I first want to take note of the fact that President Zelensky is Jewish. I am not Jewish, but I'm glad to live in a country that has people from all walks of life. We're all Jewish Americans, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans. We are happy in this democratic republic to be able to live with each other. And so I was a little incensed for Putin to describe this war as fighting Nazism. It was ludicrous, and you can imagine the Ukrainians at this meeting, this was absolutely absurd. It was outrageous. So I reminded all of those gathered from the different countries that Martin Luther King, a patriot, said injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And that means that the injustice against Ukraine is an injustice against all of us. We all may ultimately be in desperate need at some point. We all may be a refugee. We never know. And so Putin has rendered a violent injustice against Ukraine. He has done it with stormtroopers. And I would say to you, I don't even know if the Russian soldiers know the war that they are fighting. We've heard rumors of Russian soldiers standing down and leaving their posts because this is a purposeless, this is a senseless, and this is an immoral war. Putin has called this an operation, but it is not an operation. And all of the NATO allies who are freedom-loving, they have acknowledged that this is sheer brutality. It's brutality because the president has had to say, Zelensky, if you're 18 to 60, arm yourself and get out in the street and fight this battle. There is a very astute military in Ukraine, but it is not the size of Russia. And so you can see the media reports with men who are teachers and philosophers and analysts and any manner of things, dads, husbands, uncles, who are arming themselves because they are facing great peril. And Putin has launched an illegal, unprovoked, and vicious large-scale invasion on Ukraine after a thinly disguised effort at fighting Nazism and on a humanitarian mission, while he kills innocent civilians, including children and women. And so this violent act finds Russia, by way of their leader Putin, violating every human dignity. But he has violated the UN Charter, the Helsinki Final Act, and he has shredded the Minsk Agreement. That was the ceasefire accords. And his actions confirm his place in history as a crazed tyrant and a war criminal. Putin's warmongering is not a geopolitical challenge, but a humanitarian catastrophe upon civilians and innocents. Putin's disastrous war will kill thousands and threaten millions more in and around Ukraine and throughout Europe. Sadly, families, including women and children, will be left to defend themselves or be fleeing to other countries, and it will create a humanitarian crisis on the borders of Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and other places. We must not be distracted by Russia's aggression. And I know it firsthand because I met with the opposition from Belarus. Putin has taken over Belarus. He owns and dominates the head of state. And that head of state, listening to Putin, has thrown 1,000 Belarusians into prison because they voted against him in the last election. And I spoke to the wife, Ms. Tsikhanov Akaya. She is now the opposition lead because her husband is in jail, and she pleaded with us to try to save Belarus and to try to save Ukraine. All of those imprisoned, that will be the plight of Ukraine when Putin wins in Kiev and he puts in his puppet government. They will lock everybody up. How can we stand by and allow this democracy to be destroyed? It is well known that Putin attacks his friends. Ukraine was a friend. What friend will be next? And that's why I believe it is important for us to stand up as we go back to Washington, because this is a time of uncertainty, but we need moral clarity. I believe that the OSCE that I just left will come up with a resolution denouncing this work. I've just introduced with Steve Cohen a resolution in the United States Congress that denounces the actions of Putin, asking for a condemnation by the United States Congress, including the closing down of commercial airline traffic in and out of Russia at this time. It is a very difficult time, and so we must collectively as nations condemn these actions. But we must be very clear, as the Russian people have taken to the streets of protest, this is Putin's war. And so I'm glad to be standing here with those who are willing to help. You'll hear from a number of individuals about the potential of Ukraine refugees. Most of them are staying in the region, but if it is necessary, the United States is committed to taking refugees. In the concluding remarks of my statement that I made at the OSCE, I'll share those words with you in just a minute. I want to lay out what I think should happen. There is an app called SWIFT. It allows banks to send messages about transfers of money and other transfers. 11,000 banks use it, over 200 countries. Whatever the process should be implemented, Russia should be blocked from using SWIFT. We should also provide a protected airspace so that you can protect the airspace from the Russian Air Force, so that the dastardly act of bombing down on Kyiv will not contribute to the collapse, where there are hard-fighting Ukrainians on the ground, fighting with bats and fists and guns. That's what it's going to resort to. More weapons that can help them defend this invading force led by Putin. And then I believe that the Red Cross needs to be able to tell the Russian people the truth, and that is how many Russian soldiers have lost their lives. I don't want to see any lost lives. These are young soldiers. How many of them will be going home in body bags? Finally, it is not a secret that Putin has indicated his desire with a kill list to kill the leaders of the government of Ukraine. That is, from my perspective, the basis of calling Putin a war criminal. He is perpetrating acts against humanity, and he should be indicted, convicted before The Hague. I hope to pass this resolution in the United States Congress. I hope that we will also limit the entry of oligarchs with a limit on their visas and movement. I think the oligarchs' properties in the United States should be seized. I think the funds that are in our possession owned by Russia should be held. I'm only seeking peace. We need a ceasefire. If Putin chooses to come to the table, the leadership should welcome him. But unless there's a ceasefire, bloodshed will continue. I'd like to now yield first, if I might, to Danya, who has family in Ukraine. Can you imagine the many Ukrainian Americans here who are struggling with whether they will ever see their loved one again? Danya?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daria Dashutina. I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming in here today, and thank you for a chance to be heard. It's been more than 72 hours since Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation in Ukraine. It's been 72 hours since the country that we fought back to back in 1941 against Nazism decided to erase us from the geographic world map. My grandfather, a Soviet Union military veteran, in the 1940s, during the World War II, walked from Kiev to Berlin to stop Nazism. Today, my grandfather is confused. Why the country he fought for is killing his children. Russia states not starting the war. Russia states they will end it. Russia invaded Ukrainian land with thousands of heavily armed soldiers. They come to our country, destroying and burning our houses and killing my Ukrainian people. And that's how Russia did not start the war. The only thing that we have right now is our absolute brave soldiers who are fighting against Vladimir Putin even with bare hands. I understand that sanctions that many countries are applying right now will put Russia behind the iron wall for a long time. But unfortunately, it's not enough. I just want the entire world to understand that Vladimir Putin will not stop after taking over Ukraine. This is just the beginning. Ukraine is just a border for him to go to Europe. Sanctions, NATO, the G7, and even the Atlantic Ocean will not stop him unless we fight him back. Putin is a major threat to the world. We, the humans of the world, are watching today a life full of genocide. Putin, powerful, strong, and influential individual, is putting a gun to a children's head, about to pull the trigger. And no one is doing anything to stop him. The trigger has been pulled. Over 200 Ukrainians are dead today, and yet the world is only watching, like if it's a primetime show of an entertainment. To the world, to our country, the United States of America, to Texas, to Houston, if we do not stop him today, it will hit our pockets. Oil and gas prices are rising by over $100 per barrel. Families today in Houston will not afford rent because of the gas prices. The stock market will suffer. The economy is filled by perceptions of fear. Russia is propagating around the world. It will not stop with Ukraine. Putin will continue to take over more land in more countries, just like it happened before in the mid of 1900s. I just want to remind and be very clear that people in Ukraine and we as a country will never be part of Russia. We're not Russians and we never will. We have been independent and a free country for 30 years. We want to make our own decisions about what we want, where we want to move, and how we want to develop as a country. Now, I want to appeal to the United States and everybody who might hear me right now. My people, my country need your help right now. We need you to protect our skies. We need weapons, but most, we need a shelter for our people. Millions of Ukrainians are scared right now without any food, water, warm clothes. Little kids without their parents and any hope. It's no way for us to escape. It's not enough food for everybody and no fuel at gas stations, no money at the ATMs, no transportations, and no hope. We're fighting a disproportional war. I just wanted to pull out some statistics for you so everybody have a little bit of more of a clear pictures. Ukraine have 209,000 of soldiers against 900 in Russia. Ukraine have 900,000 of reserve soldiers against 2 million in Russia. We have armed vehicles, about 12,000 against 30,000 in Russia. We have 2,500 tanks against 12,500. We have 34 attack helicopters against 544. And we have 98 fighter attack aircraft against 1,511. And we also have invested 5.9 billion in Ukraine against 61.7 billion in Russia. That's for the whole world to understand what type of war we have. Thank you so much for your time.
Dana, thank you so very much. I know your husband was showing the pictures of, and I'm sure they're going to want to see the bombing, which this is the military operation that Putin says he's engaged in. He's engaged in an all-out war, and the refugee crisis is mounting. As we were leaving the region, people were pouring into Poland. Poland was the largest recipient of Ukraine refugees. We think this crisis is going to grow. And I think what has been said is the massive imbalance between Russia. That's what is so appalling. Putin's war, Ukraine, 44 million people, a sizably small military, but a fighting military, and Russia, and their determination to bring Ukraine to its knees. Let me, as I ask the Consul General Poland to come forward, as I said, I want to thank his nation. They were, as we were in the meetings and as we were there, Poland's doors had been opened as soon as the first shot was fired. It's hard for Americans to understand, but there's something called NATO. Obviously, there are only certain members in NATO. NATO protects its members under Article 5. Ukraine is a dear friend. It has not yet been admitted. It has a right to seek admission. Lithuania is a member. Poland is a member. And certainly well-known countries that we in America know more about. Not to say Poland is not well-known, but countries like, obviously, Great Britain, the United Kingdom, and France, and many others are members, Germany, and it is not the case of Ukraine. So the Allies make a commitment to protect NATO countries. And why there are no European soldiers on the soil of Ukraine is because it is not in the membership. I think as we are perceiving, our fear is that Europe was very much a product of its geography in World War II, where you could massively go across as the Nazis did. There are no real boundaries. Our fear is that if this keeps going, that it creeps into other countries. And so the real issue is to save Ukraine, to stop Putin now. We must stop him now. Consul General, if you would. Thank you so very much for your country's leadership.
Let me start with what the late President of Poland, Lech Kaczynski, said more than 10 years ago, when Putin's intentions were becoming clearer and clearer. More than 10 years ago. He was killed in a plane crash in Russia a few years after. But then he said, first it's Georgia, then it will be Ukraine, after Ukraine, the Baltics, and then the time will come for my country, for Poland. And we, for hundreds of years, we were a neighbor of Russia, Soviet Union in the 20th century. And we know what it meant, and we still know what it means. In 1939, when the Second World War broke, on September 1st, Germans came to Poland, attacked Poland, and took half of the territory. On September 17th, the Russians, the Soviets, came and took the other half of the territory. They divided Poland. Poland perished from the map for almost 6 years. They imposed their authorities, and they were ruling the country. Russians arrested and took to Russia about 1.5 million people, Polish citizens. They sent them to their northern territories as labor. Hundreds of thousands of Poles perished there, never came back. The entire Poland suffered. Warsaw, the capital where I come from, was destroyed, bombed, burned to the ground in over 90%. So we know the meaning of war, and this is what we need to avoid at any cost. In 1980, where Polish nation started undermining the Russian-imposed communist rule in Poland, almost overnight, 10 million Poles joined the Solidarity movement. And the solidarity was the most important word since then. And now, today, Polish government and Polish people express their deepest solidarity with Ukraine. All the Polish-Ukrainian border crossings are open. People come pouring into Poland. Immediately they are met with help from anyone who can help. Polish authorities, Prime Minister and the President are talking to the President of Ukraine on a daily basis. So I want to emphasize that what our best lesson from the communism was solidarity. And solidarity is with Ukraine is now for the rest of the world. We should avoid war at any cost. So, well, the prices of oil will rise. The life will become difficult, but war will end everything. So let's encourage everyone. Let's encourage our leaders so they do everything they can to stop it immediately.
Stop it immediately.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. As I indicated, we're very pleased to have the Consul General of Poland, and we thank him for giving us that very important challenge in history. And now we'd like to bring forth elected official Yves from France, and as I indicated to him, appreciate the extra effort of President Macron and the importance of the work that he is doing. Would you come forward at this time, please? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to be very brief in saying that letting Ukraine down is letting our values, is letting our democracies, and is letting our kids down. So we need to help as much as we can financially, military, and we need to stay side to side. And I'd like to thank you, to thank the United States of America, and to congratulate the great solidarity between the European states for the efforts they are doing right now. So we'll make it.
I'm going to follow you by re-emphasizing the first test of unity for NATO in the 21st century, and they have risen to the occasion. I want to give them, as I go back to Washington and the President's very hard work, some other ways to do what our Consul General is to end the war so that we don't have more war, to provide peace. I asked Putin to come back or to go to the peace table and to cease the killing of innocent Ukrainians now is most important. When I look to organizations that have been steadfast for democracy, steadfast for equality, and also have experienced the pain of the attack on one group over another. In this instance, the Jewish community. Work with the American Jewish Committee, and I'm always able to count on them as finding a way to stand for the most vulnerable people. I am quite sure that they are well aware of what Nazism is, and with their information and their advocacy, we can understand that Putin's senseless and untruthful representation of Ukraine should not be given any credit at all. And I know that they will be helping us as we move forward with those who may need our help in Ukraine. Randy, thank you for being here.
Congresswoman, Consul General, President Putin himself spoke of the need to denazify Ukraine. So let's call a spade a spade. It's not democratic Ukraine, led by an elected Jewish president today, that needs to be denazified. Rather, it's Russia, led by a tyrant who imagines himself as the 21st century Ivan the Terrible or Joseph Stalin, who's been using Hitler's 1938-1939 playbook to advance his ambitions, that needs to be denazified. This war didn't occur in a vacuum. Putin had said in early 2005 that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And Putin just didn't give a voice to that vision, but began to give it as it formed in Georgia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine as early as 2014, when he seized Crimea and Donbas. Putin claims this action is to prevent NATO from bordering Russia. Since 1949, NATO has been on the Soviet border following World War II. Many Western leaders underestimated him. It's the old story of failure of imagination combined with a dose of overconfidence. The moment to strike in winter and after the Olympics was created when any halt to Russian gas supplies could inflict lots of pain in recipient nations was right now. In the face of such naked aggression and violation of international law, what might be done to punish Russia, absent direct military confrontation? Freedom is not free. First, a unified Western response must not only be forged, as it is impressively the case right now, but it must be sustained. That's easier said than done. Once again, freedom is not free. Second, soft power without convincing hard power doesn't work with the Putins of the world. Dialogue and diplomacy are important tools, but limited in their impact absent a strong military and the will to project power when necessary. NATO member states, for starters, need to take that message to heart. Freedom is not free. Nations seeking to reduce environmental risks cannot become purist, somehow believing that such policies have no consequences. If the U.S. reduces its own production, in the short term it becomes more dependent on oil production nations such as Russia, which is in fact the case today. Freedom is not free. Fourth, the Western public cannot be silent or complacent when the fate of a nation whose aim is to become part of the values-based community is invaded and occupied. Freedom is not dying in Ukraine. We cannot remain indifferent. Indifference is not an option. We stand with Ukraine. And finally, what happens in Ukraine doesn't stay in Ukraine. China, North Korea, Iran, and other problematic countries are watching the unfolding events with immediate attention. The world can become even more dangerous if they conclude the West is not up to the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Randy. Thank you. I stood at this podium before welcoming refugees from Afghanistan. We have a very strong refugee resettlement community that I've worked with over the years, and I wanted Mr. Ali Al-Sudani to come forward, overall representing the community, but representing Interfaith Ministries. He was here with me before in the Afghan refugees, but over the years, we've welcomed those from Ethiopia, we welcome those from South and Central America, and we know that the people of Ukraine want to stay in Ukraine, they want to go home to Ukraine, but we want the world to know that the United States is committed to receiving any refugees that are fleeing the violence, persecution, carnage, and war in Ukraine. Mr. Sudani.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Congresswoman mentioned earlier, that the United States and Houston has a long and proud history of welcoming refugees. What's happening is unfortunate. The attack on the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people is really not acceptable by any means. We pray that there won't be mass influx of refugees from Ukraine, but we also understand from the lessons around the world that what's happening right now is that Ukrainian people are fleeing to neighboring countries, to Poland, Romania, and we know that these countries will bear the burden and will feel the impact, and there will be a humanitarian crisis. We at Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston, we stand ready with our federal partners and faith community and the Houston community in general to welcome and support and resettle Ukrainian refugees if that happens. Again, we pray this will not happen. No one wants to leave their country, but if you are forced to leave your country and there is no safe haven for you, then we need to stand up and we need to make sure that these individuals have a safe place to stay and find a home for them and their families. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I'm very glad to have Fial, Mr. Espinosa, who's worked with immigrants, to just say a very brief word. His agency may be asked to be of assistance as well.
So number one, we want to thank Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee for her steadfast leadership. We were all very concerned for your safety, but at the same time, proud to know that a friend was in Ukraine recently, fighting the good fight and standing up for what we believe in. We at FIEL want to point out that situations like what's happening in Ukraine continue to mitigate migration and continue to make folks refugees from other countries. So one of the things in the future, if things do not cease at the moment, we are going to be calling on Congress to consider a TPS for the Ukrainian people so that they may have protection while they undergo through the situation. But at the end of the day, we hope to not get to that point where we have to have that conversation, but rather that we stop this so that people like Dasha's family do not have to live in fear. Rápidamente, para la comunidad latina pedimos que tengan solidaridad porque lo que ha pasado en países como El Salvador, Nicaragua, está pasando ahora en Ucrania, y queremos que eso sepan que las cuestiones porque la gente deja sus países. No queremos que lleguemos a ese punto, vamos a estar trabajando con la congresista que ha sido una campeona por esto y por nuestra comunidad, para que al final del día los papás de Dasha no tengan que salir de Ucrania y puedan continuar. Esperamos que juntos trabajemos para que esto llegue a una pausa y esto pare ahora. Gracias a la congresista que siempre es una amiga. Thank you to Congresswoman who's always been a friend to our community.
We'll open up for questions. Let me again thank each and every one, Consul General, our representative from France, Yves. Thank you, Randy, as well. Danya, your powerful story. I think it should be known that she has family in Ukraine now that she is very frightened for and trying to reach them. I think it is also a very special point to emphasize that there may be an humanitarian crisis beginning and occurring right now in Ukraine with food, with clothing, with water. Many people are in makeshift, if you will, shelters. We don't have them here, but people are in subways. Those are not official shelters. I've always concerned if the Russian soldiers come to that area, what is protecting them? All these families are gathered there, and so we are at an extreme humanitarian crisis. I think it is also important to take note that Ukraine has lived alongside of Russia peacefully in that region as an independent country, and to me, there is no living, literal reason that can be explained other than a crazed mind of Vladimir Putin, and that is what has happened. And the tyrant that he has now chosen to be is now costing the lives of young Russian soldiers, young Ukrainian soldiers, but people of all ages in Ukraine who have had to take up arms to counter the massive size of Russia. What can we do here in Houston? Please use your social media and support the people of Ukraine. Encourage the United States Congress to continue as we are. We're now joined as Republicans and Democrats to find the solution that can help end the war. We are not looking for war. We're not looking for boots on the ground for our soldiers. We are looking to save the lives of people in Ukraine. That's why I came home to exert my voice that we must have that kind of recognition. And so cut Russia out of SWIFT. Cut them out now. Shut them down for their financial transactions. Bring them to their financial needs. We are not doing it hard enough. Their financial needs. In addition, behind the legitimacy and basis for clearing the airspace, protecting the airspace over Ukraine, so that that airspace will not be utilized to further destroy with the air power that Russia would have. I've also asked in this resolution that the Congress and that we consider stopping all flights into Ukraine and out that are U.S. carriers. I would ask Europe to do the very same as well. There has to be a way that Putin understands that the world stands up against this dastardly act. I would like to, as well, ensure that the Red Cross be allowed the ability to report to the Russian people independently of the loss of life of young Russian soldiers. Report to them. I want to pay tribute as I close my remarks to a father, Mita Potorelli, Ukraine, who indicated to us as we were leaving, he was with us in the OSCE meeting. He said his son was signing up that next morning, 26 years old, that he was headed home through Poland and then by way of train, 17 hours he was not going to fly to get back to Poland, and then he would arm himself to be one of those civilian soldiers who are going to get out in the streets of Kiev to try to protect Ukraine and its capital and its government. We've been at war here in the United States. We know what it's like to see our soldiers come home. For many people, Ukraine is very far away, and I can truly appreciate that. For many people, any kind of war is adverse, and I understand that as well. But the one thing that the United States has been the best at is being a defender of values and principles. We are not offenders. We do not go and attack, do not go and provoke. We're not invaders, but we have defended. And I do think we need to understand, to find the tools that can help us defend Ukraine, and working with NATO, because the potential for the region collapsing is not too far away. I want Danya to know that we're praying for her family. We want to make sure that you can reach your family as well, and I know our office will be working with you. We want Houstonians to embrace Ukrainians who are Houstonians, but use your social media if you agree that Russia must be stopped with financial threats, eliminating SWIFT, protecting that airspace, and as well stopping commercial airline travel, particularly United States carriers, from going into Russia or coming out of Russia. We do know that there are Americans in Russia. They should be protected. It's a question of whether or not they need to be able to come out in a period of time. But if we do not stop this, we don't know how far Vladimir Putin will go. He does not seem to be listening, but I'm going to keep talking, and I'm going to keep asking for us to use diplomatic tools so that there can be some ceasefire and some effort at peace. I want to conclude, and we'll open up for questions, to denounce this hostile, senseless, immoral, and purposeless war. I want to say to Ukraine, freedom yesterday, freedom today, and freedom tomorrow. Glory to Ukraine. And God bless all of us, and God bless the United States of America. We are going to be victorious. I'll take any questions at this time. The tragedy of this as we left the region is that it has the potential of spreading like cancer. These are makeshift bomb shelters. This is what they do every night right now. They're told to women and children and families and elderly, go to the subway, and they stay there because the dastardly acts have a tendency to happen at night and you can't see. They did a bombing in early morning of a apartment building, which has been seen on the news, and people were just getting up for breakfast. I was hoping that they had all evacuated that building, but thank goodness it didn't collapse, and there is alleged only a few people that were injured. But if this is going to be, and then there's a conflict of who did it, but war is without boundaries. You don't know. If someone starts a war and someone is trying to defend, then the collateral damage, it doesn't matter. You're dead. You're a Ukrainian that has died. So they have been told 3 million people are in Kiev. A lot have left, but you can't get 3 million out. So every night they go to a bomb shelter. And it will continue until, and she's showing one of them in the subway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's my family.
That's her family. That's the safest underground place like you would go in New York. It's going to continue until we can get a ceasefire. We need a ceasefire. And the only way we're going to get a ceasefire is that Russia, Putin, has to feel the pain. We have to shut him down economically. And as Randy said, as the president said, and as I know, there are going to be some collateral impact in this nation with energy costs. Nord Stream is now on hold, but you know, we know that we are a people in a transition, but the energy that is utilized in Europe is a fossil fuel energy. Energy that is produced here is still that. All of that is in a cycle. So the fact that the NATO countries are strong, they're using financial tools, I believe they should use an extra financial tool. And you can look at what SWIFT is. Everybody wants to use SWIFT. You shut them down, you shut Russian banks down. And I think you have to do that. And then some are talking about protecting that airspace. If we can do that within the parameters of NATO, because as I said, it's not a NATO country. But what you can represent is that if Ukraine falls, or if it spills over into Lithuania, into Poland, then you're talking about a tragedy on top of a tragedy. So as our council journalist said, I want peace. I'm asking for a ceasefire. Go back to Washington trying to use those words. President Macron, hope that they will keep talking about ceasefire. Allegedly, President Zelensky has had some entrees to try to say that both he and Putin would talk, or the leadership. I'm all for that. But we have to be conscious, and Russia, the Russian people have to know that the world is watching. America is the biggest pocket of people that could be watching. And I'm trying to get their attention to be watching. We have sometimes seen slaughter in the Mideast, and we haven't moved fast enough, or we have been at a war. I'm not pushing America to war. I'm pushing America to push the hardest response to stop Russia now. And part of that is public opinion, knowing that people are dying innocently with no explicable reason. I could not articulate to you, nor could most Ukrainians articulate to you, nor could most people in Poland articulate to you a precise, defined reason that Russia has now gone in, short of him saying that no one will tell him that Ukraine will absolutely not be part of NATO. But there are NATO countries that are right in the region. Lithuania happens to be one of them. Poland is another. And they've been there for years. And there's been no effort to invade Russia. So there is no definable reason. And one of the most offensive was his charge that he's going to clear out Nazism in Ukraine with a Jewish president. And none of us who've been at this meeting have seen any evidence of what he is talking about. He reminds us of the actions of Nazism. So without being able to dialogue on the cause, we need to have him dialogue on the fact that Russian and the Russian people are hurting. Sad, because the Russian people are completely innocent. They did not take a vote on this. And they're locking up protesters as we speak. And I feel for them because in Russia, when you're locked up, it's not for a short period of time. So I'm trying to get the attention of enough people for our voices to be raised, and trying to work with our government to find the best ways of bringing pain sufficient to turn him back to the idea of discussions with the head of state of Ukraine. That's where we are right now. But they will continue to go to bomb shelter. We have no end right now. I left, there was no end. And what I'm concerned about is as people are trying to escape, and those of us who, it's not the exact same, but those of us who understand hurricanes and how there are clogged roads and you can't move. This is a big city. This is 3 million people. And if they're trying to get across one border to Poland, then there's Lithuania, which is, these other countries on the border may become places as well. And then we may become a source. That is a rather long trip, but that means the war continues, and we need to end this now. We need to end this now. The American people can be part of raising their voices and just, this is simply an outrage. We can't explain it. All war is inexplicable, but we just can't explain it. And that's why I think it's important that we tell the story. And you have highlighted how painful it is that people have to go from sunset to dawn. And they can come out without goods and services coming in. They are going to have a food shortage because they import a lot of their food. Most European countries do. So they will have a food shortage, a water shortage, a weapon shortage. And I am everybody knows my position on proliferation of guns. I don't need to add that editorial comment. But these people are trying to fight for their lives. They literally are. I do want to take note of the Ukraine military. They are fighting. And I want to pay tribute to border soldiers who, I think you've all seen this story. I'm going to recite it. When the Russian ship called out to them to surrender, that this is the Russian military, and they called out 3 times, we will not give you a warning anymore, surrender. And they were protecting a border station. Will not say the word that the Ukrainians came back at, but they said to Russia, I'll just put my hands up, they said to Russia, and it went silent. There was no more communication. Russia unleashed on them at least 13 border soldiers that perished. That's the fight that is going on in Ukraine. Any questions? Thank you so very much.
Hey, you told me at 10:30 this morning.